Hello. Welcome to the session about picture character and the grammar of emoji. If you're here for the emoji talk, you can come in and sit down. I notice a few people kind of lurking around the back corners, so you're very welcome to take a seat. There are lots of seats. How's everyone hearing me on the mic? Okay. So yes, if you're here for the emoji talk, you're welcome to come in and have a seat. Feel free to sit in the fronter rows so that people who are sneaking in at the end can, do that subtly. So, right. Great, so we'll get started. First, I need to issue a disclaimer. So this session is conceived of as being complementary to the screening of the film Picture Character, which is happening later in the day. Because of scheduling things, therefore I assume that none of you have actually seen Picture Character because it isn't screening until after this. I too have not seen Picture Character because I'm very excited to go to this screening later in the day, but again, as we said, scheduling issues. I also did not create Picture Character. The people who created Picture Character weren't able to be here, and so I'm in their stead, so I can't answer questions directly about the documentary because I don't know what's in it. I was interviewed for it, so maybe I'm in the documentary. I don't know what they did with the footage, so we'll all find out together later today. Great. So you may be wondering in that case, why am I here if I'm not actually involved in this documentary? It is a good question. Partly it is because I too am interested in this question that Picture Character is seeking to address, which is how do emoji fit into our communication? And partly it's because I wrote this book, which has a chapter about emoji and how emoji work, and I'm an internet linguist who studies these things, so one might say that I have a certain amount of expertise. Also, I was interviewed for Picture Character, but again, I'm not sure if they used the footage because I know they were trying to kind of craft a certain narrative, and it may have been that they didn't want what I had to say in it, which is fine. So anyway, so I can still talk to you about emoji. I just honestly have no idea how much this is relevant to Picture Character because that's how the linear nature of time works. So you're going to get this instead. Here's one of the big questions that have been perplexing people since the early days of the internet, which is we don't have bodies online, so how can we sort of be our full selves in a context where we don't seem to have the most obvious physical incarnation of the self, which is the physical body? And emoji seem to help with this lack of body language. They've got faces, they've got hands, they've got, items involved. But the big question for me as a linguist, and I think for a lot of people who are interested in emoji, is what are they actually doing that helps with this question? So we can look back, because emoji, of course, have precursors. You have your plain text emoticons, which start out, the first citation of the plain text emoticon is from, as best as we can tell, 1986, which means they're older than many people in this room. And the emojis start in 1997 in Japan. They've got, which means they're also older than many people in this room, because it's 2020 and that makes me feel really old. But it seems like, the origin of the word emoticon is from emotion plus icon, and what a lot of us start out by thinking is, oh, they must be emotional. They must convey emotion. So just as a quick and easy question for 11 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday after we've all been conferencing for a long time, what emotion would you say these emoji and emoticon represent? Happiness, laughing, great, you all pass, congratulations, good job, you feel good about yourselves. The only problem is that you're wrong. So people say this. People say things like this. This is a real example from a paper by Eli Dresner and Susan Herring in 2010, which is looking at how emoticons work. And this is a real example they have from a forum where somebody says, "I feel sick and tired all the time, happy face." Do any of us think that this means this person is happy about being sick and tired? I'm getting a lot of shaking heads. So, and yet you were all so certain, just like 30 seconds ago when I set you up, that these emojis were happy. Oh no, what happened? So, there's got to be something more subtle going on here. And this is a question that really interests me of, okay, so if it's not straightforward happiness, what is this emoticon doing in this context? And by extension, how can we understand sort of emoji in general as a class? And so in this context, it seems that the happy face is really indicating something more like the person doesn't want to be seen as complaining, or they don't want to be, they want to be sort of soften this thing that they're saying that's negative. They're trying to put a positive spin on it, but they're not actually happy about this. Nobody thinks that they're actually happy. So this is why I like to talk about emoji as gesture, because sometimes we smile when we're not actually happy. And sometimes we do a deliberate social smile, what I think of as like the Walmart smile. Thank you for coming to Walmart today. Oh, I hope this is being live streamed. I hope that's not a problem for copyright issues. Thank you for coming to Walmart today. I'm very happy to greet you, even though I'm actually not enjoying my minimum wage job at all. So people do smile sometimes when they're not actually happy, and these smiles have a certain social effect. And it turns out we can go further with this sort of, we can start with a sort of naive analogy of emoji as gesture, because a lot of them look like a bit like gestures, and we can go deeper. So here's something interesting about gestures and facial representations. The emoticons on the right are some of your sort of standard plain text Western emoticons. They have the same eyes, but they have different mouths. And this means to us in an English-speaking environment that they convey different emotions. The emoji on the left, the emoticons on the left, which are known as cowmoji, have different eyes but the same mouths. And this means, in the Japanese context, that they convey different emotions. And if you look into the history of Western cartoons and manga and anime, you also see this sort of thing where whether the eyes are different or whether the mouths are different is sort of the primary thing that influences what emotion's going on. And you do use the other part of the body too, but this is part of the traditions there. And so you run into problems, let's say you're Apple, and you make this emoji, and the mouth is doing one thing which looks not particularly happy, and the eyes are doing something else which do look happy, and so depending on which cue you're treating as of highest priority, you're interpreting this one way or another. They've changed the design now because they realized people were having this problem, but it's something that can happen if you're not aware that there are different cues that go into looking at even these very abstract, simplified faces. So, a lot of people go into this question of like, are emoji universal? Are they conveying something universal? Well, we all have faces. When it comes to abstract, symbolic faces, we do different things at the symbolic level with them. Feel free to sit down if you're coming in and not so sure. There are still plenty of seats left. So here's an example of some emoji. And the question that I have for you as the audience is, which ones of these are obscene? Again, I apologize to the live stream. So, the first one, top right, how many people think this one is obscene? Okay, great. Good. Everyone's going well here. How many people think this thumbs up in the top left corner is obscene? Well, it is in some countries. Especially Arabic-speaking countries, although I've been informed that of more recent years, it's begun being interpreted as less obscene in cities because a lot of them have Facebook now, and under influence from the like button, it's not as obscene. But it's seen in some areas. What about the OK sign? Sign language, also obscene in some areas. I'm hearing sign languages. Which ones? Do you know? ASL, okay. Also in some Latin American countries, also obscene. What about this peace sign here? Obscene, anybody? Yeah, so if you turn it backwards, exactly, and you are British or Australian, it's also obscene. And yet, if you conventionally use some of these, you probably don't use all of them as obscene. So again, this question of can emoji do this anything universal? Well, gestures don't do universal things either. Sometimes gestures cross boundaries that languages don't, but they're still culturally specific. You still have to learn what the middle finger stands for. You still have to learn to not maybe go hitchhiking in areas where the thumbs up is considered obscene, because I don't think anyone's going to pick you up, and if they do, it's going to be for the wrong reasons. So it turns out that the gesture studies literature has a name for this kind of category of gestures that we were just talking about. It's really hard to demonstrate gestures when I have a clicker in one hand and a microphone in another. I just want to I want you to appreciate my forbearance here. So I've enlisted the GIFs to do it instead. So nameable gestures, also known as emblems, are one group of gestures. You know, like your thumbs up, your peace sign, these have names. If you're a speaker of English, you know what a peace sign is. You know what a thumbs up looks like. Even if that's not something, even if you don't necessarily think of that as something that's part of the linguistic repertoire, they have a name. And there are also certain emoji that you can invoke by their name. I really like how we're clearly running a Windows device in the background, because all of these emoji have this very thick Windows outline. And yes, I can recognize all of the device manufacturers' emoji styles, because that's the kind of expert that you're listening to. So emoji that you can invoke by name, some of them specifically resemble the particular gestures, but some of them are also, something like, praise hands, or something like this blowing a kiss. Like, I don't carry around a heart-shaped red cutout just so I can convey this particular feeling. And yet somehow, we managed to do it with the gestural repertoire as well. So this class of nameable gestures and nameable emoji can often clarify intent. So if you say something like, good job, this is going to reinforce your positive message. We're doing great here. But if you say, good job, or good job, this is not, everyone really likes to take a photo of me when I'm flipping off the audience. I don't know what this is. I'm going to get some sort of reputation here. So if you say something like good job, or if you say good job with this exaggerated wink, you're meaning something different in all of these contexts. The literal words that you're saying have stayed the same, but the emoji or the gesture that you're doing along with them have changed, and so the intention of the speaker is also interpreted as having changed, shall we say. And then you have another category of gestures, which are illustrative gestures. So you might say something like, this person is probably trying to illustrate something like, the fish was this big, I caught this large fish. Or if you want to say something like, this is so high. But you can even use literal gestures in a sort of metaphoric sense. You can say something like, my grades were going so far up. And grades going up is a metaphor. They don't literally go up a timeline. That's a metaphorical concept. So to illustrate things, we use a different category of gestures. And yet, the fish was so big, these, hands going side to side thing, this doesn't have a conventional name the way that, the thumbs up has a conventional name. And you could do it in a couple different ways. You could do it with just one single hand if you're holding a microphone like I am. You can do it with one hand wrapped around a microphone and the other hand flat out. You can do it by setting down your microphone, which I'm not going to do because then you won't be able to hear me, and so on and so forth. And there are also a class of emoji used to illustrate. And these are often not so much referred to by emoji names as they are referred to by the names of the objects themselves. So you don't need to know, if you send someone a birthday cake emoji, you don't need to know anything specific about its use as an emoji in order to convey the thing that you want the birthday cake to convey. All you need to know is the symbology of a birthday cake in our culture, which is you send it on a birthday, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know anything specific about its use as an emoji in order to do that. Whereas if you send other types of food items, for example, such as certain fruits and vegetables, you do need to know about their status as an emoji and what makes them distinct. Because if you're making, say, eggplant parmesan, you don't want to just straightforwardly illustrate that with emoji. If anyone doesn't understand this, please look it up when you get home. This is a family-friendly stream. So illustrative gestures and illustrative emoji can emphasize the main topic of what you want to say. All of these are real examples that I found on Twitter and then slightly modified so that you wouldn't be able to trace back the original person that said them. But again, I don't think it's particularly confidential to say someone saying happy birthday with some birthday emoji. There we are. So, these illustrate the sort of concept, and you could illustrate this anyone want to have a drink with me with these emoji in a different order, with a different set of them, and it would still convey the same sort of illustration. They have a lot more flexibility. And then you have a category of gestures known as beat gestures. And you can produce any sort of gesture. You can produce one of the earlier gestures as a beat, so you can produce a thumbs up in a sort of rhythmic context. You can also produce, open hand gestures that are less specific as a beat. Now that I've put the clicker down, you can watch me doing beat gestures because I'm on a stage, and it's really fun to do. Or you can watch the GIFs. And beat gestures, emoji strings often repeat in a way that's a lot like beats. You can put them between the words. This comes from a clapping on every syllable gesture that's originally from African American English, or you can put them at the end of a phrase and sort of convey this sense of rhythm. And this explains something that I found when I was doing a study of emoji with a smartphone keyboard app, where we looked at how people use different types of emoji strings. Because when you look at how people use large amounts of language data, you often look at, okay, what are the most common bigrams and trigrams and quadrigram sequences of 2 and 3 and 4 words? And what you find when you look for sequences of words is you get things like of the, and in and on, and I don't, and I want to, and things like this, out of the. These are really fascinating things that have like very high semantic value. No, they don't. These are sequences of things that are kind of the glue between the more interesting and contentful words. It's really fun that we're now competing with this other microphone. I'm really pleased about that, and I'm sure you're all enjoying it just as much. But when we look at strings of emoji, instead of seeing sequences of glue that you could put in between your more contentful things. So, for example, if people were using emoji to convey someone going somewhere, you might expect to see a lot of the individual people with like an arrow or walking or something like that. Or you might expect to see, if people are making sentences, you might expect to see that red circle with a line through it, like not. You don't see these. What you see instead are repetitions of the exact same gesture. Here's the only example on this list that it's not a straight up repetition. And I would argue that heart eyes and the face with kiss heart are still really, really similar. I don't think this is not grammatical. If you put them in the other order, it does convey the same thing. The order that they're in is probably because that's how they read from left to right on your keyboard, and that's probably why that order is more common than the other order, because we do see keyboard placement effects, especially in terms of like which color hearts tend to go in which orders. So if this isn't grammatical because it's straight up repetition, and we don't see straight up repetition in language particularly often, you can get it occasionally. You can say very, 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 but you don't see it that often, but you see repetition all over the place in emoji. The question is to look at what else in the communicative domain does have a lot of repetition, and one of those things is gestures, especially the beat sort of gestures. The last category that we're going to talk about in terms of gestures today, there are other categories, but like, hey, this is a half-an-hour talk. The last one that I'm going to talk about is pantomime. So, I went to find the most iconic mime that I could. The mime guy's doing something, but you can picture, here's your mime. It's going to be really hard to do with my hands occupied. Here's your mime. You've got an invisible wall. You're trying to hide from your invisible wall, or you're being thrown along by a rainstorm or something, and you're trying to get there. Or if you want to play a game like charades, you can say, I'm trying to describe a movie. The movie's got, I don't know, I haven't watched a movie. The movie's got a, like, no, nobody got the movie? Okay. See, this is my skill at charades, which is obviously not the same as my skill with emoji. So you can try to like describe what you're talking about in terms of pantomime, and you can play a fun guessing game with a game like charades, or if you're in a loud environment where you can't use spoken language and you don't speak a sign language, you can use pantomime to kind of convey a story and have a fun sort of guessing game in a limited context. And it turns out people also do this with emoji. So these are going to be examples that are better than me at conveying, better than my charades game at playing stories, because I planned them in advance. Let's start with the second one. Does anyone want to kind of guess what movie this represents? Frozen. Excellent. Several people got it immediately. Anyone want to guess what classic book this represents? Moby Dick. Yeah. So this is supposed to be the first sentence, which is "Call me Ishmael." So the telephone is "call," and I don't know how the rest of this is Ishmael, but it's definitely about a whale and a boat, and so sure. So these are fun games. But when you look at the corpus of how people use emoji, which is what I've done, they don't represent typical emoji use. They represent this sort of subset of emoji use that's playful and that accomplishes, that people do in sort of restricted contexts when they know they're playing a game. And we also have that sort of playful aspect of gesture, which is, playing games like charades, playing guessing games, the type of thing people do when they guess things. If you're asking somebody, oh, hey, while you're at the grocery store, could you also get some eggs? You're probably not going to send that in emoji. You're going to send that in words, and maybe add one or two emoji at the end, either as a happy face, like if you don't mind, I'm trying to make this request politer, or maybe an egg emoji just to sort of emphasize and illustrate what you're saying, but you're not going to take chances on trying to narrate this very practical request entirely in emoji. We don't see this in the data, and I don't think anyone's really trying to. So that's the kind of fun bit there. So the thing that I find exciting about talking about emoji as gesture is that it also illustrates some fun things about gesture that we haven't necessarily, that not everybody is necessarily paying attention to. There is a literature on this, but I didn't know it existed until I started collaborating with gesture researchers, including Lauren Gahn, who I co-wrote a paper about this concept with. If you want the scientific paper version, I think it's cited in the notes on the slides. So I didn't know as much about gesture as I do having looked at it through emoji, and I think it sort of illustrates parts that we often take for granted about how we talk. Once I started looking at gesture, I can't go to a coffee shop anymore because I'm like, ooh, what are they doing with their hands? What are they doing with a gesture? And sometimes it takes something being in a new medium, like emoji, to think about something we've been doing in a very old medium, like gesture. So thank you. I feel like it's always better to end early than end late. I'll be hanging around, let's say over there, if anybody wants to talk afterwards. But we should clear the stage for the next presenter. And thank you all so much for coming.